so I can upload on the way home. I'm in the middle of nowhere in the van. Mark awoke to the sound of gunfire. He looked at the clock and it read 11:37. He pulled on his jeans and a t-shirt, grabbed his little camp carbine and his boots and ran outside. The firing was coming from the front of the subdivision, but it was only sporadic. Mark ran down to the command post. He heard footfalls behind him and turned to see Jim with his M1A, trying to keep up. When the two men got to the command post, they asked what was going on. Peter Hogan was the radio operator, and he told them what he knew. Greg Gentry thinks it's a crew of 6 that came by the gate about 30 minutes ago. They got real mouthy with the gate crew, but backed off when they saw how many guys we had covering them. They walked off to the east, but Greg thinks they came back. Where are they? Jim asked. Tower 2 says they're at the northeast corner of the subdivision on the ditch across the road. In the ditch across the road. Can the observation post see them? Abe said that the angle is too steep for him to see them, Peter replied. Who are they shooting at? Mark asked as he was lacing up his boots. They're just taking pot shots at the gate. Where are the rovers? Rover 1 slipped back into the western foxhole. Rover 2 is on their way here. They should be here right now, Don Wesley, the leader of Rover 2, said. Mark noticed that Ralph was with him. Good. Here's what we're going to do. He pointed at the map of the subdivision that Gunny had drawn before he'd come to live here. Mark put his finger on the command post and traced the route they would take as he talked. We'll run down Silver Mine Road to the eastern fence. Then we'll run down the fence line until we get even with the last house. We'll need to lay down some cover fire to get into the foxhole, so we'll split in half. Jim and I will go first while the rest of you cover us. We'll call in for the gate and Tower 2 to give us some cover, too. We'll run down the wood fence behind the houses and jump in the foxhole. Then we'll cover the rest of you. Any questions? The 3 rovers' eyes were as big as saucers, but no one said anything. Mark turned to Peter. Radio everyone our plan and make sure that Tower 2 knows we'll be coming up behind them. I don't want to get shot by our own guys. And call the sheriff department. He turned back to his group. Let's move. Mark took the lead and jogged down the street. It was a cloudy night, but the almost full moon shone through the clouds sufficiently to see a few yards ahead. When they got to the fence, he turned left and headed toward the county road. Mark slowed his pace a little. The ground was a little uneven, and he didn't want any of his guys out of gas for the sprint down to the foxhole. A few seconds after he had turned the corner, he caught a dim flash of light about 50 yards on this side of the tower, too. He immediately stopped and raised his hand in a fist signal to signal his team to stop. Ralph, who had just started taking guard classes, had been following too close behind Mark, and he bumped into the point man hard enough to knock him down. Fortunately, they were in an empty lot that George had plowed, so the dirt was soft. If it had happened any other time, it would have been funny. Mark's rifle landed in the dirt beside him. Mark picked himself up and his carbine up. He rose to a kneeling position and signaled for the other rovers to get down with him. He pointed to his eyes and then toward where he had seen the light. He strained his eyes and could make out a shadow of a person. He saw the intruder bend over for a second, and when he stood back up, there were 2. The second was easier to see since he had on lighter clothing. Mark caught a glimpse of another person running up to the fence on the other side, and then they disappeared. He assumed the attackers had left 1 or 2 guys on the road to create a distraction, and the others were trying to sneak in behind the watchtower. Clever plan, Mark thought. Lucky we came this way, or it might have worked. He figured the guards in the tower were only watching the side where the firing was coming from. Mark signaled for Dawn to give him the radio. He quietly radioed the command post and had Peter inform the men in Tower 2 that there were some uninvited guests crossing the fence on their south side. He wanted them to wait until they were all on this side of the fence and then to shine a light on them and tell them that they were surrounded. Mark hoped they could surprise them and take them without any bloodshed. As he was talking, the cloud cover cleared from around the moon a little bit, and his ability to make out the strangers improved some. He watched as 3 more people appeared. Then, when they started to move toward the middle of the subdivision, one of the tower guards turned on a flashlight and shined it on them. At 50 yards, the light was not very bright, but Mark could see some of the intruders were women. The tower guard yelled, "Freeze, right there, we have you surrounded. Throw down your weapons and put your hands over your head. Do it now." Mark thought that the man had probably seen too many episodes of Cops, but he hoped the authoritative voice in command would have the desired effect. The answer came in less than a second. A single shot rang out. Mark watched the flashlight fall. It seemed to take forever for it to hit the ground. He had no idea if the guard had dropped it or if he'd been hit. He raised his weapon to fire at the raiders. The electric dot scope was not on. He lowered the weapon back down so he could reach the control and whispered for his men to open fire. He heard the .30 caliber booms from Jim's and Ralph's rifles. The SKSs that Don and Steve Parsons held had a distinctive sound too. Mark reached for the rheostat on top of his scope and found that the adrenaline pumping through his system had degraded his fine motor skills to the point that turning the control was difficult. The intruders were firing back at his group now, and he could hear projectiles whistling over his head and occasionally see dirt kick up in front of his group. He finally got the scope activated and looked through it. Mark took aim at one of the attackers. He took in a deep breath, exhaled half of it, steadied the dot on the center of the kneeling man. When the dot was where he wanted it, he squeezed the trigger. The little .45 caliber carbine went off with a pop. It almost sounded comical next to the rifles the others were shooting. Mark was shocked to see the man still kneeling in the same spot, firing his weapon back, so that the muzzle flashes winked at uneven intervals. How could he have missed? He fired again with the same result. The third, fourth, and fifth shots did no better. Mark's mind was racing. No one had hit any of the raiders. What was going on? Jim was an excellent shot. Mark looked at him. He was slowly and deliberately firing. "Jim, why haven't you hit any of them yet?" "I can't see my sights," the athletically built shooter answered. That made sense. That was probably why the raiders hadn't hit any of them either. That's why Mark liked a little red dot scope for night, but why hadn't he hit anyone? He realized all of a sudden that his carbine was sighted in at 50 yards and his targets were over 3 times that far away. His fat, slow bullets were in the dirt long before they reached the target. He raised the sight so that it was centered about 2 feet above the head of the man he was trying to get. He pulled the trigger quickly and emptied the rest of the 10-shot magazine. It didn't appear he'd hit the man, but he must have been getting close. The attacker dropped to a prone position and kept firing. Mark ejected the empty mag and inserted a fresh one in its place. He hit the slide release and reshouldered the little Marlin. When he had aligned the sights to where he wanted them, he pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. Mark muttered a $1 word under his breath. He checked the carbine and saw that the slide hadn't moved all the way into battery. He pulled back on the handle, ejecting around, and let it go. The slide banged home with a satisfying clank. He looked to his left and saw Ralph struggling to get a magazine out of his pocket. Steve was attempting to reload his rifle with a stripper clip, but adrenaline seemed to more than just slightly impair his motor skills. Mark aimed and fired twice more before the little rifle jammed again. Shit. He repeated the drill to clear the weapon, but this time the bolt didn't close all the way when he let go of it. He tried again to find that it only went about halfway this time. "Damn it," he said loudly enough for Jim to hear him. "Are you hit?" his friend asked. He looked to see Jim rocking home a fresh mag. Don was looking through his sights like he was trying to thread a needle and he couldn't see the hole. "No, my carbine is jammed. I think it's got dirt in it." "Then get on the radio and tell the guys in the tower to put some fire on these assholes," Jim instructed. Mark did as he was told. Then he laid the radio down beside Jim. "I'm going back to the CP to get another rifle. I'll see if I can pick up some of the reserves and come at them from the other side." "Roger that," Jim said as he squeezed off another round. Mark turned and ran back the way they had come. He stayed stooped over so he wouldn't present a good target for the MZBs. It was slow going, but he could stand up and run full out as soon as he rounded the corner. The fresh plowed dirt was like sand at the beach and his calves were burning by the time he reached the street. As he rounded the corner, there were 4 strange riflemen walking toward the command post. Mark's heart jumped into his throat. The seriousness of the situation hammered him between the eyes, as if it was a 9-pound hammer. Questions flew past Mark's head like bullets, like the bullets had only seconds ago. What should he do? What could he do with a jammed rifle? Could he get them with just his pistol? How many squads did these MZBs have? What was their goal? Did the community stand a chance? How could he warn everyone?